Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt inside the Beltway, joined by Jonathan Williams, who is the chief economist for the American Legislative Exchange Council. Good 2024 to you, Jonathan. How are you?
Well, great. It's great to hear your voice, my friend, and good to be back to talk about our new Rich States, Poor States yet again, 17 years now.
I am going to get to richstatespoorstates.org in a moment, but I got to ask you an economics question first. Because you are an economist, President Biden last night wrote on Twitter yesterday afternoon, women in sports continue to push new boundaries and inspire us all. But right now we're saying that if you're the best, women are not paid their fair share. He's referring to Caitlin Clark making $340,000 a year. It's time that we give our daughters the same opportunity as our son and ensure women are paid what they deserve. I responded, sigh, it's about television revenue, period. But as Joe Biden, as he's repeatedly shown, does not get basic economics and reveals it again, and it could be soon, when the WNBA attracts advertising and ticket sales on par with the NBA, the WNBA's players will make the same. Am I right, or is Joe Biden right, Jonathan Williams?
Well, I think pretty much down the road, you better ask that question. I think you're always right compared to Joe Biden. Look at his track record when it comes to the economy, right? I mean, you haven't racked up $35 trillion of debt anytime recently, have you?
No, I haven't. But I just, whenever I hear we should pay teachers more, look what the NFL is making. I just despair of basic economics. It's why Texas, Tennessee, and Florida are attracting people, and California and New York are losing people. It's basic economics, John.
Well, it's not rocket surgery, right? That's as my co-author Art Laffer likes to say. I mean, this is economics 101, and as long as we as Americans have this amazing opportunity awarded to us by our founding fathers of choosing the type of government that we want and freedom of association, there's no such thing as building a wall between two states. I mean, in California, it would be probably building it today because look at this, massive out-migration away from states like California. You've lived it, you know it well. You've seen New York. I mean, New York is down incredibly 2 million Americans over the last 10 years on net. I was just in Albany earlier this week with conservatives at the Capitol. They're 50th out of 50 in Rich States, Poor States now for 15 out of 17 editions. And so there's just some states that can't get out of their own way. While, as you noted, some very good ones there a minute ago, so many are moving in the right direction. And there's so much optimism, Hugh, of happening at the state level compared to this gridlock at best, if not doom and gloom, happening here in D.C.
2 days ago, Jonathan, producer Dwayne was griping about his tax bill. I said, well, move to Texas and you won't have to pay any state income taxes. And of course he can't because the other side, his other half, is employed in California. My question to you is, though, who's number one in Rich States, Poor States? And where do people get the report?
Well, richstatespoorstates.org is how you get this year and every other edition preloaded there to see how your state's been as well. But the great news about Utah, the number one state this year, again, for Economic Outlook, has been number one for each and every edition, Hugh, of Rich States, Poor States, going back 17 years. And
that's not very fair. That's not NFL competitive balance.
We need a little fairness. That's the Biden view right there. There you go. I mean, the Utah incredible experience, though, is just so many good things from the flat tax to pension reform. They've had this great innovative truth in taxation piece that you and I have talked about to keep property taxes in check. And then, of course, Utah's skeptical of these so-called free dollars coming from Washington and have put in place some protections there for taxpayers in the Utah budget. So, I mean, it's an incredible free market success story. And the proof's in the pudding, Hugh. Look at who's the fastest growing state over the last decade. Utah has grown about 18% over the last decade alone. So there you have it.
Jonathan, in terms of school choice, I believe, and I think it will take a few years to unfold, that those states like Florida and Idaho and Ohio and Texas hasn't done it yet. I won't take Texas off. Iowa has done it, that have adopted school choice, robust school choice, will rise in your rankings. Did that show up yet?
Well, I think we saw West Virginia, the first state out of the gate that did school choice, with our hero, Senator Patricia Rucker, the immigrant from Venezuela who sits on the ALEC board, has been on your show to talk about it.
Yep.
That's the first out of the gate, and that was one of the biggest winners in this year's Rich States, Poor States. West Virginia had their best all-time ranking out of the 17 years. And by the way, Hugh, as far as we can find the data going back, as you know, West Virginia has been an out-migration state. They just lost one of their 3 congressional districts in 2020 in the reapportionment. But for the very first time, Hugh, the new numbers are in from the census. West Virginia is growing again and getting individuals on net from the other 49 states. That's not an accident, and it's because of tax cuts and school choice that made it happen.
Which states are the other big movers, Jonathan, up and down in richstatespoorstates.org?
Well, Texas was a big winner this year, moving up from 13th to 6th. They have long been a bastion for free market ideas and avoiding the income tax, as you mentioned earlier. They also, just this last year, had probably the largest tax cut in state history by trying to get to the bottom of the property tax issue that has been long a sore spot for Texas homeowners. And so that was a big move in the right direction. Nebraska moved in the right direction. Mississippi also cracked the top 20 after their flat tax and substantial income tax cuts in recent years. But you combine the tax cuts with school choice in places like Utah and Arizona. Arizona's number 3 with their 2.5% flat tax in school choice. I think that's an amazing just a combination that's going to yield huge results when you combine those two policies together.
Now, Jonathan, how do you weigh in the adverse impacts of new migration? Arizona is overwhelmed by migrants. Now, some of them are moving to Chicago and New York and Massachusetts and other so-called sanctuary states. But does that migrant burden show up anywhere in your rankings?
Not yet, but it certainly could in the future editions. And I fully expect those areas that, for instance, are signing those individuals up for free health care and education and all kinds of other government services are going to see a huge uptick in potential tax burdens unless they start to get their fiscal house in order. But you cannot ignore that impact from a fiscal or economic perspective.
I'm talking with Jonathan Williams. He is the chief economist and executive vice president of ALEC. You can follow him on X at Tax Economist. All right, Jonathan, you told us New York's 50. Who are the people who had the biggest drops? You know, in the NFL, usually half of the playoff teams fall out of the playoffs the next year. Who fell in the rankings this year?
Well, there's a couple of interesting takeaways there. I mean, the bottom 10 were the bottom 10 last year with a little reordering. So there's a quintile of states there that have just a horrible economic record. We don't need to go through all of them because your listeners know who they are. If they live in one, they know who they are. The Illinois,
yep.
the California, the New Yorks of the world. One of the big losers, though, this last year was Washington State. State that had previously done well as a blue state because it avoided a personal income tax. And you remember, Hugh, they came up with a new definition of a capital gains income tax they said was not an income tax in their Supreme Court recently. It's a great little bit of sophistry that's going to live on, I think, in infamy when it comes to tax policy debate. So they created a capital gains income tax. I think that's the harbinger for a future personal income tax, unfortunately, which will move Washington State in the bottom 10. They've already seen the consequences. We've seen the news of Jeff Bezos moving out of Washington State, going to no income tax Florida, and Washington State potentially lost out on nearly half of the revenue they thought they were going to gain from this capital gains tax. So there you have it. It's a state that's, had been positive, now is moving in a very alarming direction.
Now, Jonathan, I want to close with Florida. I went down there for the NBC Salem debate that I co-moderated among Republican would-be nominees, and I hadn't been to Miami in a few years, and I was stunned at how glorious it is. It's just a beautiful city now. How is Florida doing? Did it move at all? Because they were already pretty good, but there's not much room at the top to go up with Utah stuck there in number 1. Did Florida drop? Did it stay the same at number 2?
Well, now Florida is just an incredible powerhouse. Clearly, I mean, it's when it comes to economic performance, Florida is the top in the country. Economic outlook, there's still a few things they're obviously trying to navigate when the insurance market, property taxes, and other things. And so they aren't close to dethroning Utah this year, but they're still a top-tier state in the top 15 when it comes to outlook. But if you look at where Americans are moving. I was just down in Naples. A bunch of great Midwesterners, obviously, down there here that have kept the politics conservative in that part of the state.
My oldest friend lives there
That's
now.
a booming area.
Yeah, but I'm very, very worried about one thing, which is that we've got the Floridians are going to figure out that they don't want any more people to move down there, and they're going to throw up some kind of barrier to entry because it is getting awfully crowded. Jonathan Williams, richstatespoorstates.org. If you want to find out where your state is and how it's doing, head over to richstatespoorstates.org. Jonathan, always good to talk to you. Follow him on Twitter, or X, at Tax Economist. I'll be right back. Stay tuned, America.